Good evening and welcome back to the last two sessions. I hope you've had a fantastic day, both in terms of networking and learning. Our first speaker this evening is Talita Ferrera. After working within globally established brands, including KPMG, Investec, and as CFO for BMW until October 2016, Talita has chosen to step out of 22 years in corporate business to resolve the authenticity dilemma and start an authenticity revolution. Her authentic and inspirational leadership approach has enabled her to become a Fellow of the Institute of Directors in 2015 and to be nominated for the Business Leader of the Year 2016 Awards for the South African Chamber of Commerce in the UK. Talita is passionate about living in true authenticity, purpose-driven collaboration and harnessing diversity of thought. Please welcome Talita.
Thank you, Jabbar. So I have a few messages for you today. And we have a really challenging future facing us. I think we saw that this morning when Tammy and Linda spoke to us. And it really takes us a long time to develop the next generation of leaders. Authenticity is a dilemma that faces both individuals and organizations, and I'll try to explain that to you a little bit more. I do think that a redefinition of authenticity is something that can help us to connect with our deepest authentic power and can be a differentiator in the business world. I think we are able to live our greatest potential and passion every day, everywhere, and with everyone equally, and I'll go into that a bit more. And then I think what's really important for you in the room is to help create organizations, really, where people can live their passion, their purpose, and partnerships that haven't been thought about before, that really add long-term sustainable value and make sure that the organizations are sustainable for our future. So, what challenges do we see coming? There's a military term that is very often used and to describe our new world, VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. What we need to look at is just the recent events in politics, and it kind of sums up all of those, that whole acronym, all into one. Linda spoke this morning about the way that people will want to work in the future and how that way changes. Companies having less permanent employees, but having very good networks to people. In my corporate life, I was used to leaders spending maybe 2 decades, even 3 decades with the organization. I found that with the new graduates that came in, this had totally changed. It was a new game, 5 to 8 years on average, and then they'd want to move on. And they wanted to add value. So there was a difference coming in this generational longevity that we were seeing in organizations. The smartphone, a really wonderful invention, keeps us very connected. But if you were someone before who enjoyed having real separate lives, so a separate persona when you're at work, to a separate persona when you're at home, to a separate persona when you're with your friends, the smartphone has integrated it all into one. You can tweet to your friends, then do a work email, then do something different. And so this changing very quickly between different personas might confuse us and cause very high levels of stress. And this won't stop, because the interconnectivity and the Internet of Things will start to connect all our devices. Our cars, our homes, our phones, everything will be interconnected. So best not to want to be different in different roles that we fulfill. Another interesting piece of research, or the Economic Forum, spoke about a 4th industrial revolution coming. Linda Gatton spoke this morning about 40 to 50% of the jobs that are really rated today will be done by artificial intelligence by 2025. The same report talks about what skills are necessary and the difference in the top 10 skills. So what really will set us apart from the robots is this emotional intelligence that we have, creativity, solving problems in different ways, and cognitive flexibility. So really our empathy, our heart, that will differentiate us as humans. Oops, sorry, pressed the wrong button there. Another piece of interesting research, the Athena Doctrine. 64,000 respondents were asked across the globe to categorize traits into masculine, feminine, and neutral. And both genders, of course, male and female, can have both types of these traits. But what was found really is masculine traits like dominance, aggression, and feminine traits like collaborative and intuitive are the different traits that people correlate more towards happiness, leadership, and really then being more moral. It's really the feminine traits that are moving people to really feel a connection to others, to really be led by them, to really feel like moral behavior. It's really fascinating, and 64,000 is a really representative sample. So things are really changing out there. What do I mean by an authenticity dilemma faces both organizations and individuals? I've already spoken about really, are we the same in every relationship everywhere? Do we really bring the best of ourselves to our work relationships, to our home relationships, to friendships? Are we really the same everywhere? What differentiates us? And if we look at organizations, sometimes they are filled with inauthenticity. I've sat in so many performance appraisals where we really look at someone and we say, they don't quite fit in. They're not quite the material of the company. But don't we really want to celebrate diversity and have intellectual diversity? Sometimes we really want people just to conform. We don't want them to be too difficult to manage. We also sometimes see a lot of silo behavior. So for instance, this fight between, for instance, sales in an organization and the back office and finance or human resources. But what we really need is people to think cross boundaries to really solve problems in a different way. So what is it that we want from a new leader to solve this dilemma that we face? We really want a really good collaborator, someone who can really drive purpose, who understands their own purpose and also understands the purpose of the organization overall. Someone who is highly adaptable and resilient to these changes that are coming. Google did some research, and really the way that a leader creates trust and safety in a team is really emotional, connecting with people. That's what makes the difference between great teams, this emotional safety and connection. A good leader is someone in the future that really uses this diversity, intellectual diversity, really to differentiate and solve problems in a different way. If we only ever rely on our history to differentiate us, how will we cope with this pace of change? The new leader really needs to believe in proper inclusion, true inclusion, and an unconditional acceptance of difference. I will come to this a little bit later. And of course, this new leader needs to effortlessly flow between these different elements of their lives. So we often hear when people refer to Google that there's this fail fast and that one should really, in big organizations, now have this culture of a startup. I've been in a global organization, you kind of see lots of mistakes being perpetuated all over. But it's because people are so afraid to really share their learnings. But why don't we do that? If we share our learnings, then perhaps we can get to a differentiated solution. We really need organizations where we will reward the collaboration and those purpose-driven partnerships. We also need to live authenticity and authentic change, and I'll come in a minute to what I really mean by that. And Linda mentioned this morning this longevity in organizations. So we really need to start focusing already on how would these tiered engagement strategies look. And we really need to inspire real connection between people and making a difference. And I'll tell a bit more about that. So our leaders at the moment are a bit in overwhelm. Technology, change. I've heard leaders say, oh, another change. How am I supposed to do another change? How am I supposed to do that still on top of the day job? So overwhelm, increase of stress. So what is it that can really help us to differentiate? I believe that is authenticity and a new definition. So you might wonder, why is a CFO standing in front of you now talking about something like authenticity? And it's because of 22 years in corporate life and because of the behaviors that I saw there. And then I led a cultural change program on top of my CFO job, and I was always responsible for HR as well. And I realized when we were defining values that the younger generation really feels that authenticity is extremely important. But every single person that I then asked, what is authenticity or what is authentic behavior, most people had a different answer. In a worst case, it was an excuse for someone to be just obnoxious or rude, or in a best case, someone understood their values and their purpose. And so I decided to do this research into really where did authentic leadership come from, and to think about a new definition. Sorry. So the state of doing is what I really call how we live today. So what I see a lot is a lot of ego-driven behavior, a lot of fear, a lot of limiting self-beliefs, a lot of people who just feel like they're going to be caught out when they move to that new job. A lot of competitive behavior, sitting in a boardroom, seeing someone has to have that last word, or trying to minimize your exposure, not really wanting to say, I don't know the answer. I need to think about that, not really wanting to be vulnerable. And what sometimes happens, and what I've seen here, is a lot of people are searching for something, but they're not finding it. They climb that corporate ladder, go to that next job, and the next job, and the next job, and that's what defines them. But basically, there's no happiness there, and there's no fulfillment. Or I've met some people who live from one holiday to the next, and then after the holiday, it's like, oh, I have to go to work again. And that just means for me there's some incongruence in their lives. So where is it that we want to really go? And this comes from the original authentic leadership. It's the dimension that I refer to as a dimension of consciousness. It's really understanding yourself a lot better, having a higher self-awareness. When someone in the office is pressing your button and continually pressing it, and you feel the emotion welling up and you're getting really angry, to be able to step away from that and to understand what triggered that behavior. Why did that behavior come? And then the other thing is really to understand your core values, your purpose, what you're about, and whether your values are congruent to those relationships that you are in, not just in the office, but also at home. The next dimension is a connectedness dimension, and I'll go into two very important prerequisites in a second. These connected relationships are more meaningful when you understand yourself. It's almost like the Monopoly game. You can't really pass go unless you have the self-awareness. Because with the self-awareness of yourself comes a deeper awareness of other people. You're also not walking around just pushing other people's buttons because you're more controlled in your behavior and who you are. And then purpose-driven collaboration. I think there's so much collaboration in organizations today, but is it really driving purpose? So for instance, here it's really a dimension about who am I, who are you, but what can we create together? Is there something unique that we can create that wasn't there before? I spoke about these two prerequisites for these connected relationships. And the one is unconditional acceptance for difference. So my 8-year-old daughter comes home and says, Mommy, am I weird if I'm different? And so that rings a bell in my head. When people are different, we think that they are weird because we don't teach that there should be just an unconditional acceptance that people are different. And people have different values and different religions. Judgment is also a very interesting thing, especially in corporate life. I think I could fill the room 3-4 times over if I think about every time I had an instantaneous judgment in my mind about a topic, about someone, about something that I thought. But it's to suspend that judgment for a minute and not to judge. Dr. John Demartini is really an expert in this field, and he talks about locking yourself in a psychological prison because you judge someone, especially if it's that same someone who's pressing your buttons all the time. So the heart of connectedness is really vulnerability. And people say vulnerability shouldn't be in corporate life, but how do you create that emotional safety in a team? You really create it by having people trust you. Sometimes it's about saying, I don't have the answer now. There were times where I had to say to my team, I have this intuition or this feeling that something is wrong and we shouldn't do this, but I can't exactly explain it to you at the moment because the mind takes a bit longer to catch up. But then it's about having the confidence to say that and then coming back in a day or so and saying, I've had a few more conversations and this is why it was bothering me. So Brené Brown says it really well. The sharing is probably not constructive if it's not feeling vulnerable. So how does this power emerge when you've become both conscious and connected in this way? So there's a higher level of intuition and a higher level of purpose, but it's an acronym. So you are more present, you are more confident because you understand who you really are. You overcome fears. So 18 months ago, it was my biggest fear to leave corporate life. I've left corporate life, I've published my book, and I actually started consulting for a big company in Munich. And so those fears were just irrational. And in a worst case, what would you do? I would just go and get another corporate job if I failed. But those fears are irrational, and it's really looking at them with a very clear mind that helps us. The whole integrated being. We connect very much with our minds and with our bodies today, but we don't really connect with our hearts, that empathy that I mentioned before. And we also don't really connect with that intuition. And if we have it, it's normally a very, very soft voice. And if you don't listen properly, you'll think afterwards, oh, I knew that, but I didn't listen. Effortless flow is really moving from one dimension of your life to the next dimension of your life effortlessly, because you're the same. You have the same set of values. You have the same congruence. You understand who you are. And you don't need to regulate so much. And then resonance. Resonance with your purpose and with other people, because you are able to live in this way. So how do we live this greatest potential and passion every day? We do the hard work. We do the hierarchy of potential, which is really starting with those basic beliefs at the bottom, understanding our biases, our behaviors, going up, really creating these connections with other people, understanding what is your brand, understanding your values, and then bringing that whole integrated being together to really understand what is your purpose and what is your passion. This is also when you can move between those different elements of your life, where you can really understand, these are my values, this is what I'm here to do. Some of the friends I have don't understand that when they're together raising children, that is their shared purpose. They're always having an argument about who contributes the most in the household. But it's not really about that. It's really about this greater purpose of raising children, sending them to university. It's not really important who's contributing what. And it's really thinking about things in a different way to bring the best parts of yourself into all those relationships. How do we create organizations then where we have this passion, purpose, and true partnerships? And I think this is what technology will do. It'll drive us there. If 40 to 50% of the work that we're doing is now done by robots, what will happen in organizations? I always say that, a bit provocatively, that I wish we can replace the battle of the sexes with the battle of the inner beast. And it's this beast of the ego, this beast of not really understanding who we are. Because if we really think about it, if we could bring those male advocates who already support their wives, their daughters, their cousins, if we can have them bring those best parts of themselves into the office, perhaps we would move a lot further forward on the gender debate. So we really want powerful advocates for change, for emotional intelligence, and for those feminine traits that we discussed before. We also really want business to be a place where people can connect and where people can develop. The Aspire Foundation has done some research about why women quit in a certain age group and why they quit corporate life. And the biggest reason is because they don't feel like they can make a difference. Not an impactful difference that also has a difference on society. So perhaps when artificial intelligence takes over, perhaps then we can all volunteer more, do more things aligned to those corporate responsibilities, and have less of a tick box for just corporate social responsibility. And then greater partnerships. So I'm hoping that the triple Ps can be extended to include partnership and passion and purpose, because I think that Companies coming together who would have traditionally been each other's competitors can really make a difference in an industry when they're looking at societal issues and facing them together, creating these unknown partnerships that we didn't have before. So what would my call to action be to you today? You are the influencers in the room. You are the ones who can help to create the authentic leaders and the authentic organizational cultures, where people really celebrate this greater diversity of thought and intellectual diversity, where people are allowed to be more creative. This morning, Tammy said you can't force someone to be creative and to innovate. But I think if you put different people in teams together and help them to realize each other's strengths and how they can rely on each other, and they're comfortable for that, we can move there. We should have this greater learning and share our learnings and not be afraid that it shows actually weakness. It's actually strength to share what went wrong so that others can learn from that. And you can help with this unconditional respect for difference and therefore true inclusion. Like Gandhi says, we should all be the change we want to see in the world. And while I was writing my book, I started to think about ripples of change. And I think every small change that each individual in this room can make towards being more authentic and not compromising, or towards bringing the best of yourself into all the interactions, will create this ripple of authentic change that can help us to start a revolution.